Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest is Layla Pomper. Hi, Layla.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. And I'm excited to have you because we're going to talk all about processes. I know I usually talk about processes, but here you're also a process consultant. You help businesses with processes. And I actually came across your videos in YouTube, and I was super impressed because you really get people being believers in process, right? You work with companies that, we work more with fast growing companies that are lacking consistency, that already probably have some processes, but maybe not all of them are well documented, or they're on the journey and they're really running very fast and they need more consistency. They've been there, they're established, and now it's a matter of getting them to the next level. And you work with companies, also helping them with processes and procedures, but more on the beginner side, right? So I thought it'd be great to have that conversation and talk about how do you get aware of that you need processes and what does it look like, etc. But let me also read your entire bio so people will know who you are. So you are the creator and CEO at ProcessDriven, and you help small teams turn chaos into process. I love that because I too, like my whole thing is about putting order into chaos, right? I mean, that's, I think like both you and I enjoyed very much. And you started in 2018 and you combined software operations and storytelling to guide 1,600 plus teams to enjoy the process. So definitely it's great. So tell me a little bit about how did you start this journey? Like what made you in 2018 start ProcessDriven?
The origin story is a little bit of an accident. So if we're hoping for some kind of process-oriented flow for how this happened, I don't have one, full disclaimer. 2018, I, at that point, had kind of quit a job with no plan. And candidly, I started a business because the jobs I wanted, which I knew at that point I had interests in operations and I had interests in kind of training and development, I wasn't qualified for. Classic struggle there. And I knew I needed to have either an advanced degree or probably about 5 years more experience to get those dream roles that I wanted, because I was in between. Around this time, I had helped my husband start his own little contracting company, and I'd grown up around small business. And my whole through line, looking back, was that I really enjoyed the systems and process side of things. I enjoyed the integration of technology and how people work. And so talking to a mentor, I kind of realized that the best way I can get experience while learning a whole lot without breaking the bank on an MBA that may or may not be useful to me was to start a business as my MBA. So people think I'm lying when I say it now, but I literally started this business thinking, I'll do it for 2 years, I'll learn a bunch of stuff, and then I'll be qualified for that job I really wanted back in corporate.
Wow.
It's been 5.5 years, so it hasn't quite gone to plan, but I'm enjoying it.
That's awesome. What a great story. And why processes from all things? Like, why did you decide to help people with processes?
I don't think I ever did. I started, my first niche was a virtual assistant. And I kind of moved beyond that into technology because that was a pretty easy niche to be in. And I kept finding myself basically firing myself because I would work with a company on, say, technology for bookkeeping. I would be setting it up for this small company, and I would then build a system that would automate the bookkeeping or automate the file management. And then all of a sudden I'd be out of work as someone who worked hourly. And so I realized, I might want to charge for that stuff rather than the hourly work. And so it was kind of like a slippery slope. And eventually I discovered ClickUp and other pieces, and the ducks all started aligning where I was able to finally start to specialize in the process space. But it was a multiple year journey, really, because I don't know if you found this, but I don't think process right now is really an established space. I'm curious what you find.
Yeah, it's not one of those things that people wake up in the morning and say, I need processes, right? It's something that
Not yet.
you have to bring their awareness, right? I mean, that's what I discovered. That's what I find. And you need to make them aware of why processes are so important.
Mm-hmm.
So from your experience, why do you think processes are very important to a business or important to a business? I mean, I feel it's vital, and I'm sure you do too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what got me so excited about it and how I kind of developed a business mission around it is when I started getting into this space, because I'm nowhere near as experienced as other folks here. And I started reading, the corporate books, the corporate trainings on how to implement process improvement and Six Sigma and this, that, and the other. And I realized how, those might be a little overblown for the companies I worked with, which were sub 50 people. But there were little things in there that if we could just implement them, they would make a tremendous difference. And to me, it kind of felt like fitness and health. When I started to first learn of how many positive effects would come from just walking 30 minutes a day, I became very excited. And the same way with process, it's such a big area. And there's this large pool of people who have no exposure to it at all. They don't realize in this case, fitness or process does anything. But if they just did that 30 minutes a day, it would change so much. The 20% makes the 80% of impact, that kind of thing. And that possibility for really helping, in my case, SMBs, mom and pop shops, the folks that are being, purchased and acquired and conglomerated, that was really exciting to me. And that's kind of what motivated me to go down this path further, because I felt like there was a real need of translating business, corporate language around process and kind of boiling it down to the crash course.
Absolutely. So what would you say, like, to a business owner?
Mm-hmm.
And they ask, why should I document? Like, what is the importance of documentation? What changes have you seen because people now have processes when they didn't have it before?
I think that's where it's hard, because for us as process geeks, we're sitting here, we're like, documentation is the fun. The result is the journey. But as a business owner, I think pretty much any goal you have for the business can in some way be codified in documentation. If you're somebody who is motivated by time off, documentation is the key to turn the door to being able to take time off. If you're motivated by getting funding or selling your business, disposition down the line, you want to exit, documentation is the key for improving that multiple on sale. If you're someone who just wants to delegate, documentation is just recording knowledge. And for as long as human beings have existed, you're able to use the recording of knowledge to help you in any goal you have. So why not pull that lever? Why just ignore that because it feels foreign and unknown? So my answer to that person would be, whatever goal you have, I bet a little sprinkling of documentation, just like a little exercise a day, is going to make that goal easier.
I agree. I found that the main reasons is needing consistency. It's lacking consistency, and you want consistency. I find that it is that knowledge transfer. If your key employee leaves tomorrow, or you want to cross train. I find also a lot like risk mitigation. Because when you have well documented processes, your errors can decrease tremendously. You can give the same service to each. Basically each customer, each client, that you can have uniformity of service. You have more accountability. You are able to delegate, the exit strategy, like you said, if you're about to be acquired or if you want to sell the business, definitely that will also increase the value. So all of that, those are definitely reasons that I've seen, right? So and I've seen also the ROI. I'm sure you did too. So what would be some of the return on investment that you have seen with clients that you worked with, in terms of they didn't have processes and now they do? What difference did it really make for them?
The unit of measure will be different for each team, but I think what you hit on here is it's important to define that as a before and after for your priorities. I think documentation, if I keep relating to exercise, exercise can be used for so many different things. Do you want to be more in shape? Do you want to win a bikini contest? Same with documentation. The things you measure is going to differ depending on what's important to you. But some things to look for might be things like the number of support tickets you receive. For example, if you have a product that is self-service, documenting common solutions, creating a self-help or preventative option to avoid an issue or a complaint or an email in the first place, seeing that number go down is a pretty good metric for a lot of teams focused on customer support or customer experience. Maybe you're on the sales side of things. A great sales metric might be something like how many hours is your sales team spending on communicating with prospects? Maybe hours per prospect would be a good one here if they're time tracking. By documenting common questions, objections, email templates, standardizing that a little bit more, you're going to see time reduction on the time per prospect. So the time that is being spent by those sales reps is spent personalizing, fine-tuning, thinking of strategy, and not spent using Grammarly to check for typos in that same follow-up email they've sent 30 different times. So the metrics can change, but it all comes down to what you hit on already of standardization, consistency, and I think more importantly than anything, the mental burden of having to remember. I mean, how do you put a number on that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah. So now you are also a big fan of using a task management system. You use ClickUp. I actually use it in my business. I use ClickUp, but I also work with clients if they want to use Asana or Monday or any other task documentation platform. What have you seen in terms of the importance of actually using a task management platform?
I think at higher levels, probably the levels you're working at, people think process documentation and they think policy binders and playbooks and wikis and so on. Oftentimes, for folks that are just new to this space, the best first form of documentation is simply writing down what you need to do. Task lists are documentation. So to me, that is the most tremendous benefit, and why when we're talking to our audience at that earlier stage of the journey, we're telling them, hey, get a task manager or work management software, we'd call it. And while you're recording those tasks, which is a form of documentation, write down how you do those tasks. And look at that. All of a sudden, you've got the gateway drug to process documentation. I think that is really underestimated. The value of having a set list of all 37 things you need to do to have an HVAC client leave happy and leave an amazing review on Google. Whatever those 37 steps are, having them written and copy and pastable to each new client sounds so simple, and yet it's incredibly impactful. And I think a task management tool is just steps above having a printed or a whiteboard system for managing that same flow.
Yeah, absolutely. And then of course you use the work management system, like in terms of like also managing teams and managing collaboration and whatnot, and running projects, etc., as opposed to having it in different spreadsheets or different places. I mean, it definitely makes a huge difference, right? So I agree with that. Absolutely. What other pieces of software do you like, or do you find that there is successful or helpful for you?
Yeah, I am of the mindset that, your system is not your software. The method of operations, the way you have things happen, that should be able to be transferred to any tool. So we work with ClickUp and SmartSuite, and we have people use Notion and Airtable and Coda and you name it. And it doesn't really matter. So in terms of supplemental tools, when we have clients incorporate more tools into their stack, usually it's because they want a little extra convenience and they have a little bit more resources than they do time in a given moment. So a great example would be AI, the buzzword, if I can throw that in here. Using AI to help give you a running start on turning a transcript into an SOP can be helpful. It's not perfect, but it's a running start. Using a dedicated process management software can be helpful. Just gives you a little bit more control, not required, but helpful. There's so many other tools like that that just kind of augment and stack on top of your task manager that we look at. But in my view, I think, again, to the 80-20, the vast majority of the benefits you're going to see in process documentation don't need a fancy software. You need a software, and like you said, one that's all together. But adding these extra things help, but not in the biggest way, versus just having one source of truth, regardless where it is.
Right. And I think it really depends also on the size of the team, your team
Yes.
members, what you're trying to accomplish, because like I know for us, we use a process documentation software for each one of our projects. But again, if you are starting with a smaller team, I would not say, okay, you need to do it right now, because you can totally do it on the other tools. And you're right, it has to be a centralized place, which will be your truth. Because the worst thing is that you can have some of it on a Word document somewhere, some of it on the server, some of it here on paper, some of it here. So whatever you do, make sure that you choose one place where you're going to document your processes and keep it there. And then everybody knows that if it's there, it's truth. If it's somewhere else, it might not be accurate and it might not be what you're looking for. So I completely agree. This is great advice.
And I just want to piggyback on that. I think it also helps you with the biggest challenge that I view to be with process documentation or process standardization, which is that change management. I think people think the hardest part of doing this process stuff, if I know I'm preaching to the choir here, is, writing it all down. But in fact, writing it down is definitely the heaviest lift. But the hardest part is changing human behavior, human habits, right?
Absolutely. So what are some of the tips that you can give that you have seen successful in terms of change management and how it comes into play?
I have the fortune of working with smaller teams where there's a lot more personal connection and fewer bureaucratic layers. So I'm going to give that caveat out there. If you're a team of 500 people, this may not help you that much. But for these smaller teams, some of the tips that I found work really well is make sure that process is a part of your conversations. It sounds very like a soft skill, but as a manager, I know we probably all know the idea of criticize the process, not the person. But in case this is a new concept to folks, when the email newsletter goes out at the wrong time, oh my gosh, crisis. But rather than pointing to Susie and say, Susie, why did you put that at the wrong time? Point to the newsletter scheduling process and say, hey, how come Susie can make one human error, which we know human errors are going to happen, and it goes out and it's not caught? Why is that process so weak that one human error that we know is going to happen can happen in this flow? Making process part of the conversation and the central point of any issues that come up, to me, is probably one of the most effective, because you can simply say, hey, Susie, can you change this process and incorporate a new step to have a QA check, a secondary person look over this? A second tip, if you want to just keep sprinkling these in here, is to encourage co-authorship. This isn't as easy in larger institutions, but teams of sub 100, very reasonable. Whether it's a work management software, an SOP, a system, a process map, anybody involved who you expect to regularly use an item, an asset, a piece of your code, essentially, they should be involved in the authorship, in my view, whether that's the ability to leave recommendations on an SOP saying, hey, this step isn't correct, or actually writing the SOP. I think a lot of the times with process documentation, the experts, we love our stuff, so we'll just get in there and we'll type everything up. And then we just hand over the Mona Lisa of processes to a team. And we're like, all right, here you go. Have fun. And I don't know about you, but if I received the Mona Lisa, I would never pick up a brush and try to touch it up when things change over time. Nope, it would stay exactly like it is. And so encouraging co-authorship and ugly drafts, to me, is a nice way to improve that adoption.
Absolutely, because it gets everyone involved and you get the buy-in, because that's yes. What it is. There is the buy-in and you're invested in it and your voice is heard, so it's yours. I completely agree. One of the things that I recommend also is, like, let's say, even if the authorship is not there, like the co-authorship, right? I mean, maybe you're working with a few individuals to create it, but then you actually have everybody on the team review it and add to it. So that's part of the co-authorship as well. I agree. And, to your point, is like you make it part of the conversation, you make it part of the culture. I always recommend that whenever there are issues that have to be discussed or have to be discussed and handled, basically, bring up the process. What is the process that is there a process? If there isn't a process, why not? Let's create a process. If there is a process, was it followed? And if not, why not? What is broken with the process? You just like have a whole checklist that you go through to make sure that it's basically the process is being reviewed so you can follow it. And I agree with that.
Yeah, we got to be careful. We have a drinking game for the word process in this episode. People are going to go off because I know we've been using that word a lot. And some people might be hearing that and saying, okay, I understand what you're saying, Adi, but process? Like what is that? I just want to put out there that I also think we take process a bit too seriously. We put it up on this pedestal. And if I may, a process is a habit that you maybe thought about a little bit. So I think sometimes people hear process and they kind of like distance themselves. They're like, oh, that's for those other people. But you have a way you walk to the mailbox. That's your habit. That's a process.
Absolutely. No. And I say that there is a process for everything, whether you have it documented or you thought about it or not. The way you wake up every morning, and if you drink coffee and you go and make yourself a coffee or tea or whatever you do in the morning, you have the process of the morning. You just don't have it documented. So I agree. It's not something that, I have to wait, because I hear people say, well, we're changing the process, so I have to wait until it's perfect. It will never be perfect, but it's better to actually write it and put it there so then you can improve on it. I mean, I can tell you from my own business, we're right now writing, we created a process to change something the way we were doing, because we found that there is a hole, there is a gap.
Always. Yep.
So so we're doing it, and all of it every 2 days, myself and my operation person, we are just like changing it. Oh no, we need to improve this, or we need to do this, and we need to do this. At some point in the next few weeks, it's going to be close to perfect. No, but it's going to be done. But right now, this, and let's document it and let's change it, and it's okay. It's fun. That's part of the fun, is to figure out the workflows, figure out the processes, figure out what we're doing, right?
That's why one of our mantras around here is enjoy the process, because I think when we put it on a pedestal, it sounds like this other thing that we can't touch, that we need, the Mona Lisa brush. But when you look at it that way, and we think about, you ask an entrepreneur, what could you do differently about how you onboard customers? An entrepreneur is going to have 100 ideas, but then you ask them, hey, do you like process? They're going to say, ugh, no. Writing SOPs? No. Process is the fun stuff. What you just described, that is the fun stuff. And SOPs and how you equip that process, that can maybe be boring from time to time, depending on your personality. But there's so much fun. It's where it's like the internal brand. It's the soul of your company comes to life, kind of like DNA, in your process. So I love that example. And I think that's why I keep coming back to fitness, because can you imagine if you're sitting there, like people are probably doing right now at the time of recording this, they're thinking about New Year's and they're like, all right, I'm going to get in shape. Here's my workout plan. 7 days a week, 40 hours a week. I'm going to be working out at the gym. And we all know what's going to happen January 1st. You're going to do it for 2 days and you're going to realize, oh, this wasn't realistic. Scrap it. But that's kind of like what happens with process. If we try to make it perfect and we do this overblown plan and we're like, this is the Mona Lisa, and then we try to do it, it's always going to not work. It's not going to fit right. It's like making clothes, but never trying them on or checking measurements until you're done. So like fitness, weaning yourself into it, doing what you're doing exactly, of mapping something, trying it, saying, don't really like that. Let's tweak this little thing. That's the fun part. And that's how you build something powerful versus restarting every, year.
Absolutely. I agree. So Layla, what is your advice on how to measure the effectiveness of a process?
I think going back to those key metrics, it'll depend on what you're measuring, but just be consistent in keeping in that checkpoint. I think probably a cliche one, but I'll bring it up here because it's a good benchmark for those entrepreneurs and business owners in the room, is distance from the business. That's usually an initial goal for folks. So something like a basic goal might be 2 weeks vacation. Very basic goal. Everyone should be able to achieve that without a crisis or a phone call. But I think once you get to beyond basics to maybe beginner, 4 weeks vacation. Beyond that, 4 weeks unplanned vacation. 6 weeks vacation, 6 weeks unplanned vacation. To me, those are some pretty achievable goals. They're not difficult to accomplish in a course of 6 months of some dedicated effort. But the first time you do it, it's going to be a train wreck. You're going to get your phone blowing up and there's going to be emails and texts and, oh my gosh, no one knows how to get into the Stripe account and the webhook is broken. But the next time, you'll have a process in place for how to resolve that Stripe issue, and it'll be fine. Then you level up to the next stage. I think there are so many metrics to choose from, but I think the game of leadership being surprise exited from the business is probably the best one for, self-funded small teams.
Absolutely. I agree. That's the overall, like you said, the goals, like we talked in the beginning, but I also think more specifically, you have the KPIs or the metrics for each process. So let's say you are building a sales process, right? Like let's say a lead intake process. Good. So now you can measure, you can attach to it a metric to see that that is actually working, like in terms of conversion or in terms of the time that it takes to respond to a lead or any missed leads or whatever it is. If you actually assign a specific metric to the process and the metric is going up, that the process is working, right? So you have to measure it in order to know that. But I agree also setting up like what we talked in the beginning, the why of why documentation and achieving that, then it's great. Layla, amazing. So if people want to find out more about you, how can they do that?
They can head to my website. So I've got a whole bunch of stuff, but you can find most of it on my website at processdriven.co/ADI. We actually have a link for you here. So if you want to come in, you can head over to our space. We've got tons of free resources for folks who are maybe not quite ready to get a consultant in to like fix everything overnight, but they want to kind of dip their toes. I know we talked off air about how we have like the primary school of process, and then they can level up to high school and college off of yourself. That would be the best place to get in touch.
Great. And you also have a great YouTube channel with a lot of good videos, a lot of good content. And yes, it's all about processes. So you talked about New Year's resolution. I mean, this is an evergreen. I mean, people can listen to this content whenever, but you can also make resolutions, not just on New Year's.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Definitely my advice to business owners, right? And I'm sure yours too, is get started on systematizing your business so you can achieve the freedom that you want.
Fiscal new year, we'll call it that. New fiscal year goals. So anytime.
That's right. Well, Layla, it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for being a guest on this podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.